Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast, the SE Etc. series. This is episode 196. 196, Patrick. 196. It's a lot of episodes, especially since we started out doing these once a month. Anyhow, I'm Chris Hadnagy, CEO and founder of Social Engineer, the Innocent Lives Foundation, and the Institute for Social Engineering, as well as social-engineer.org and a bunch of other stuff. Anyhow, and I've been doing this podcast since way back in 2009. And on the SE Etc. series, I am joined by my trusty co-host with a solid heart right now, Patrick Laverty.
Hey, Chris.
How you doing, Patrick?
Awesome. It's so great to be here. As you said, my name is Patrick Laverty. I am the senior team lead for Social Engineer, where I work with a team of professional and certified social engineers to do our phishing, vishing, and whatever other types of engagements. We have a whole lot of fun with it.
You certainly do. And you make it fun. So that's kind of cool. But talking about fun, if you like the topic of social engineering, you should check out our Slack channel. Patrick is really heavily involved in the Slack channel. So just like the work here, it's a lot of fun. But we discuss everything from the psychology of social engineering. We actually have people that come in and ask for help with jobs, like pretext that they're coming up with for jobs that they're doing. We discuss people who want to be in the field and how they can get into it. We even just have a group that gets together a couple times a month and does practice sessions, believe it or not. We've had almost a dozen, maybe 10 people or so find jobs now through our job board on the Slack channel. There's a lot going on in there. It is a family-friendly channel. So if you like to join us, you can find the link in the show notes, or you can hit Patrick or I up on Twitter, and we'll be more than happy to get you the link. Come on in and have a fun chat with us all about social engineering. This episode is sponsored by Social Engineer. So if your company is looking for anything to do with SE services, like maybe you're dealing with a lot of phishing attacks right now, or you're wondering how to really enhance your phishing program, it's kind of fallen flat. You're not really sure why you're not seeing the results that you want. Or maybe you're experiencing an uptick in smishing attacks, or you're getting worried because we're back in the office now and we're traveling more. So in-person attacks are even increasing. Well, if any of those things are your worries, just hop on over to social-engineer.com, check out the things that we do, hit us up, ask us questions. We'd be more than happy to walk you through and see how we may be able to help protect your company and educate your people to be more secure. Talking of education, a host of our training classes are now up on the website, so you can jump on in. I think this podcast will come out. Nope, I think you missed the January class. If you haven't come, you can't. You have to look for the next one. But we have a SIRA class, an OSINT class, and there'll be other APSE classes up on the website this month. So check it out and over on social-engineer.org. Also, I want to invite everybody who's listening to take a moment to go and visit innocentlivesfoundation.org. I cannot tell you how proud I am of the people over there. Our group of volunteers and employees are working hard each and every day to our mission, which is to help law enforcement locate and geolocate and track down people who are trafficking children and harming children and creating child abuse material. And we do that through open source investigations as well as completely legal means. We're not a vigilante group. And as of right now, as far as I could tell, we're over 475 cases that we handed into law enforcement, with almost 700 cases worked total in the 5.5 years we've been around. I cannot tell you how proud I am of the team over there and all the work that they're doing. They stuck it through good times and bad times, and we're still doing the job. You can support us if you want to volunteer to help us out. We always need volunteers. Or you can support us through your donations because we are a nonprofit. So hop on over to innocentlivesfoundation.org, check us out, and see how you can help us. And last but not least, if we're talking about the ILF, you can't help but mention Clutch. Why? Well, Neil's on the board, of course, and they're the best rock and roll band on the planet. So if you're listening to this podcast on Spotify or iTunes or one of the other audio means, then you're hearing the awesomeness of Clutch in the both opening and exit of this podcast. They allow us to use their music. We want to thank them. Shout out. The whole band is huge supporters of ILF. So we're really happy to have them as part of our podcast stream here. Okay. Let's talk about what let's talk about what we're talking about. That's a weird way to introduce it, Patrick, but
that's certainly one. And also people have to go check out Slaughter Beach.
Oh, geez. Like their new album,
which is
Sunrise and Slaughter Beach. Yes. It's maybe up there. I'm going to garner to say that right now it is up there with one of my most favorite albums of theirs in history. And every one of their songs is a hit. It's amazing.
It's a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's January, so we should expect to see some new tour dates. So go over to pro-rock.com, check out their tour dates. So you got me back on clutch, Patrick. That's
Yep,
what you did.
That's not hard to do.
It's not hard. I mean, literally, all you could do is just like, you can even talk about, I was driving my manual car the other day and I'll go, clutch. Yeah, let's talk about Neil Fallon. Right? It's just the way it works. It's terrible. Yeah.
Well, there was even a clutch discussion in the Social Engineering Slack channel.
There was. Yes. Well, I think someone named Patrick asked the question about what is the best album to start with if you're not a Clutch fan.
Yep.
It's good. I really like that guy, that Patrick guy. He's a solid dude.
It was very helpful with report writing to have some Clutch going on in the background. So you
gave
me a playlist.
It is. It's a wonderful report writing band for sure.
All right. So this podcast, we've said before that this podcast title is Social Engineering, etc., SE, where you have other podcasts where you talk to experts in the industry, you talk to business leaders, and you also have one all about the science of social engineering with Dr. Abby Morono.
Yeah.
So I think what we wanted to do was figured that was 3 podcasts that you can do each month. And since most months have 4 weeks, we needed another one. And the thought there was, what else can we talk about? Well, the idea that we had was we can talk about anything we want. So that's where we decided to call it Social Engineering, etc. So if anybody out there has ideas for things for us to talk about, let us know. You can hit up Chris or me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on the Slack channel that Chris mentioned. Another way that I often refer to this is the dumpster dive of social engineering, because you never know what you're going to get. It's going to be different every time. You might find a rabid raccoon one time, or you might find paper with passwords on it. You never know. So you never know. To keep checking back. We've already had some great episodes, but I thought for this one, it would also be kind of fun to talk about the role of empathy in social engineering and how important empathy is. But I think one of the first things that we should do is I think there's often some kind of misunderstanding, and you got to start with a definition. So if we want to also differentiate empathy from sympathy, because I think some people confuse those sometimes, and they are different. So one thing that I did was I looked up a dictionary definition of empathy, which was the ability to share someone else's feelings or experiences by imagining what it would be like to be in that person's situation. Now, Chris, what do you think about that definition? Is there anything else that you would change about that empathy definition?
I like that definition, because when we think about when we think about empathy, like when I picture it, the role, let's say, let's not even talk about SE for a second. Let's just say the role in just human communications, human connections. Having that ability to share someone's feelings or experiences means more than just saying, hey, I get you. I feel for you. Like, you're going through a hard time, Patrick. You got my sympathy. I feel for you. Here's my prayers and thoughts are going out to you. That's different. That's not empathy. And when you and I were talking about this, I remember saying, like, I can never purely empathize with what my wife went through in giving birth. Impossible. Because I will never have the experience of giving birth. So I can understand pain. I can empathize with her feelings. I can empathize with the worry maybe that she had during those moments. I can empathize with the pain that she may be going through to an extent. Mm-hmm. But with all the aspects of actually giving birth to another human, something I can't empathize with, because I can't share that experience. We can't have the same experience in that. Yeah,
I can see where you're coming from with that, where it's impossible for you to have the same exact experience and to feel the exact same kinds of things. I also am thinking that there's a little bit more to it, where it's also having the understanding of what they're going through, where to not have any empathy for somebody going through the childbirth process, to just be like, dude, I felt pain before. Things have hurt me, so suck it up. It's not that hard. Where having empathy for it is to understand that this is a pretty traumatic event that happens to the woman's human body as they're going through this. And there's a lot of pain with it. So I do think that it is possible to have empathy in that we've never experienced the same things, and it's impossible to experience some of these same things, but we can also have a little bit of an understanding with that. And you also talked a little bit about the difference from sympathy. And this is one that I think we'll probably also talk about a few other times as we go through. I've interviewed other people and tried to talk to them about empathy and how they do it. On my podcast, where I have the Layer 8 podcast, I interviewed somebody who was a negotiator in the Middle East for the United States military. And I was like, how in the world can you sit across from somebody and not just want to jump across the table and kill them? Because this person that you're interviewing might be somebody that you caught trying to set off, bombs that were trying to kill you and, other people that you work with. And the answer was empathy. And, and the difference is there. He said he's not being sympathetic. You don't have to agree with what the person is coming from, but you just want to be able to understand it. It helps to be able to understand where these other people are coming from. Now, you might not agree with the idea of trying to kill your friends and kill the people you work with, or trying to kill yourself, but you can understand the situation that they're coming from. Is there anything else that you think you would want to add to the difference between empathy and sympathy?
Well, before we get to sympathy, I wanted to kind of hit on something that Dr. Goleman, I've spoken about him on many podcasts before. He wrote the book Emotional Intelligence. And he breaks, he says there's 3 different kinds of empathy. So the first one is one that you were talking about. It's cognitive empathy, right? So he talks about cognitive empathy as having the ability to understand another person's perspective. So kind of like what you said about, your wife. Like it would be completely unempathetic for me to say, it would be a lack of empathy for me to say, look, I've had serious pain before, suck it up, right? That's not, but can I put myself in her shoes giving birth? No, but can I try to understand her perspective? Like, you have been in labor for X amount of hours. You were uncomfortable. You're about to push another human out of your body. Like, all sorts of things are happening to you. Like, can I have empathy for that? Yes. So that's cognitive empathy, right? The one thing that Dr. Goleman said is that this requires people to think about other people's feelings rather than feeling those feelings directly, right? So I don't have to feel the pain my wife is going through. I could just try to think about what kind of feelings is she having, right? Then the second one is emotional empathy. And this is the ability now to physically feel what another person is feeling. So that's something like in that case where I was speaking of before, that emotional empathy, that's something I can't do when it comes to birth. And even in your example with that negotiator, I had a similar conversation with a law enforcement agent with ILF who was, who hunts pedophiles, and asking him, like, how do you interview these people? Like, how do you do that and not want to jump across the table? Well, it's definitely not emotional empathy, right? Because emotional empathy is that ability to physically feel what another person feels. So it's not that. But then the third type of empathy is this thing called empathetic concern, right? So the ability to sense what another person needs from you and then being able to provide that. So like maybe feeling like empathetic concern or empathetic empathy would be linked to sympathy more so. Right. So we'll talk about that in a second. But in that first one, that cognitive empathy is where someone like your negotiator or the law enforcement agent I spoke to is how they can do their job, is because they don't need to feel that horrible feeling that the terrorist feels. They don't need to feel that hatred towards another person. But my guy, I don't know if your guy did this, the guy I was speaking to, he asked me a question. He said, if you had to boil it down, what does a pedophile want? And I said, I'm not going to answer that question. And he's like, no. Don't think of it that way. Like, what do they want? And it took me a long time to think about it. And I said, well, they want to connect with someone they feel understands them. And he's like, right. So can you understand that? Like, don't you want to connect with people that understand you? And I'm like, I do. It's just not kids. And he's like, again, you're getting off balance. Like, who cares, right? Like, it's you're not talking about that. You're saying, can you understand the emotion that drove this person to take that action? And I can. Now, that's not going to drive me to become a child predator, but I can understand that desire, and that enables you to have that communication with someone. Whereas, the sympathy part for me is when you feel sympathy for someone, you could feel sorry. You could feel, wow, like I see you're going through a hard time and I feel bad for you. I don't feel the feelings that you're having. I'm not going through that hard time. I'm not understanding that stress that you're under, that, physical pain that you're under, that recovery when you were going through surgery and all of that. I'm not understanding that, but I feel bad. So sympathy allows me to maybe change my communication with you or do something nice for you to help try to ease that pain. But I don't need to be empathetic. Not that I don't need to, but I don't have to have empathy in the sense that I'm feeling that same pain that you are to understand that you're going through a hard time.
And I think you touched on a group in there that makes a lot of sense to differentiate and understand empathy different from sympathy, which is like the Innocent Lives Foundation investigators, where they're not going to have sympathy for the people that they are looking for, but they do need to have an understanding of how their mind works, what they're looking for, basically trying to get inside of the head of the people that they're looking for in a way to know how to find them, how to find the information. So if they can get an idea of why they're doing these types of things and what they're looking for, that might help with their investigation to be able to track down that type of information.
Yeah. And, if you think about like there's the relation between sympathy and empathy. I mean, they're both emotion based, right? So that's important for us to understand. But, sympathy, carries like a greater, let's say, emotional distance than empathy does. Mm-hmm. Like I can have sympathy for you because you're going through pain or suffering when you were recovering, but I can remain emotionally distant, right? So I could feel sympathy for someone I never even met. Right? I could watch a commercial and see kids suffering or dogs and be motivated to go donate out of sympathy, right? I feel sorry for what's happening, and that emotion drives me to take an action. Whereas it's really hard to be emotionally distant when you're talking about empathy, because with empathy, I'm trying to imagine or understand how you might feel. And even though I may not have those same emotions myself, I'm trying to understand that. And that's making that emotional distance much more difficult. So there's a lot more investment with empathy than there is with sympathy.
And I think another difference between those is, and this would be great to have Dr. Abby to answer this type of thing, is just as you were describing that, it kind of came to me that it seems as though sympathy might be more of an innate thing, where empathy seems to be more learned, where we can learn to be empathetic, that quite often we have to learn to be empathetic because we have to learn what other people's experiences are. Where the sympathy part seems to be, it's just the emotion that comes out where like you said, you feel bad for somebody, somebody's hurt, somebody's feeling sick. You feel bad for them. That doesn't, to me, necessarily seem like a learned behavior so much as the empathy aspect of learning what someone else's lived experience might be.
Well, I think that would be a great question for Abby, but we know that people like sociopaths or psychopaths, they may lack empathy. They lack that ability to have that feeling for others. So they don't really understand suffering. And in the psychopath case, they may even enjoy that suffering, right? So I think what we're empathetic about or even sympathetic about is kind of from our upbringing, right? But there's been many studies that have been done. I was thinking of one when you were saying that, where they took little kids like 2 to 4 years old, and they'd be in a room playing, and they would have an adult come into the room, sit across and act really sad, maybe even cry, and see if the child would get up to try to comfort that adult and how long it would take. And they tried it with all different types, male, female adults. They tried it with people of different colors, ethnicities, different sizes and shapes. And what they found is that in that age range, children didn't care what you looked like. They didn't care about your skin color. They didn't care about your size. They didn't care if you were technically beautiful or not. If they saw someone sad, they wanted to go up and share their toy or give them a little pat on the knee or find out what was going on. And that, I'm not sure if that hands down proves it, but that kind of helps us see that this feeling of being sympathetic for someone or even having that empathy, seeing sadness on someone's face is in us. It's built in us that we want to have that connection. And when you meet someone who lacks empathy for others, I think that's why it feels so bad. When we meet people, even, bringing it back to social engineering, we meet people, we read these stories in social engineering where maybe a company took an action to test their people that seemingly completely lacked any empathetic thought. And it makes us angry. It makes us upset at that company because it's like, how could you do that to somebody? Like, wouldn't you think that that would ruin their day or their month or depress them? Like it upsets us because inside of us, we want to be empathetic with others.
Absolutely, because I do think that we have the ability to learn empathy, although at the same time, I also think that what we are learning when we say we're learning empathy is we're just learning different people's experiences. Because I do think that we probably have empathy for what we already know, but there's a lot of other cases out there that we don't necessarily understand. And one of the ways that we can learn more empathy and to learn how other people live is to try to open ourselves up to be able to see what other people's lived experiences are. And I think all too often we stay inside of our own bubble. We stick around with people that are like us, that think like us, that do a lot of similar things. And one way to really expand on that is to get out of that bubble and to be around other people who don't have the same types of experiences, who have done different things, who live different ways, and be able to have an actual open mind for understanding why those people might be different from how you are. And I think very often we might go into some of those experiences with some bias in our mind where we've already been told, well, those people are different because of XYZ. So you go into that experience like, okay, I'm seeing that this person is different, but it's because of XYZ. As opposed to if you go into it with an open mind and actually talk to them, live and experience with them, you might start getting a slightly different understanding of why their experience is different.
You know, it's interesting when you were saying that. I had this situation once with a company I was working with, and a new manager had got hired on. And I was sitting in the break room and I'm talking with this guy, and this other employee comes in. And it's his first day. He had just started it. We're getting coffee. It's in the morning, you know. And this other employee comes in and introduces himself. Let's just say his name is John. And he's like, "Hey, John, let me tell you a few things before you start in your first day." He's like, "So, you know, Larry over here, he's like going to be your laziest guy. You're going to motivate him the most. And Sally, well, she's always complaining about other people." And when he got onto the third person, John stopped him. He said, "Whoa, hey." He said, "Hey, listen, I just want to ask you a quick favor. I don't want you to go through every employee here and give me what you learned about them over the last few years. I want to have that experience myself." And the guy's like, "Okay, well, if you need any advice, just let me know." And he walked away and he wasn't upset. And when he walked away, I was like, "Well, that's interesting." I said, "Like, why wouldn't you want the inside details? Wouldn't that help you be a better manager?" And he's like, "Nah." He goes, "Because now when I go meet Larry, I'm going to be thinking, you're a lazy bum. And when I meet Sally, I'm going to be expecting her to give me some gossip. But if my first experience with Sally is amazing, that's what I'm going to remember. And if my first experience with Larry is a hard worker, that's what I'm going to remember. So if you give me all your negative experiences, then I'm going to approach them with bias." And I'm like, and at the time I wasn't in SE. I wasn't, you know, doing social engineering, but I was always interested in these kind of topics. I just remember that being fascinating to me. Like, this guy didn't want the dirt on other people because he didn't want to approach his initial relationship with them in a biased manner. And I thought, wow, how amazing is that? Because that's going to lead him to have a better ability to feel empathy for another person, because he's going to be able to approach that person, learn who they are from his own camera angle, and then develop his own relationship with them. And then whatever it is that they say to him, he can now learn how to react, you know, work with that individual on that basis, not something that, let's say, I gave him or someone else gave him. So that was a pretty fascinating experience, and letting your life experiences teach you, not letting other things. You know, I think of that now. We jump forward to 2023, and we think about how, you know, this is going to probably not be a very popular statement, but how damaging social media can be. You know, I remember when this was quite a few years ago, when there was all this news, and we never really went public with any of this or talked about it because we never really completed. I didn't know how to do it fully, but when all this news about there was just all these videos surfacing about cops shooting African Americans or shooting Black people. And it was like, it seemed like you couldn't turn the news on without seeing another horrific story. And we had these burner phones sitting around. So I opened up 2 Instagram accounts. And on one Instagram account, I just searched for, you know, cop helps Black guy. And then on my other Instagram account on a different phone, I searched for cop shoots black guy. And it was amazing that now there wasn't one thing in either of those Instagrams that didn't support my initial search. Like that was it. Like my initial search on that first phone, all I saw was these happy, lovely stories of puppies and people getting free shoes and cops playing basketball with kids and skateboarding and, break dancing and all this amazing stuff. And on the other one, it was just horrible stories of violence and oppression and racism. And now both of those things are true, right? Both of those things are reality. They both happen. But if I was on this account, and this was my actual social media, then all I think is, man, every cop is a racist, horrible human being that just wants to kill people that don't look like him. And if I was on this one, I'd be like, wow, all those people don't even know what they're talking about. Like, that's not true. Like, cops are amazing. Look at all these wonderful stories. And what you said is that having that open mind to understanding things that aren't in your particular little bubble, I think that's a major piece of having empathy, because if all you understand is your own life experience, how do you ever understand what someone else is going through?
And during some of our prep before this, I think one of the things that you had mentioned was the social media bubble and how the social media bubble can make our bias and lack of empathy worse. And I remember, when you wrote that, my immediate thought to that was actually the opposite. And that's because of my own experience, where as I have actively tried to improve my empathy understanding, I've gone out of my way to expand my bubble using social media, because there are social media apps that are completely passive, or, mostly passive, where you don't necessarily have to directly interact or have any kind of requirement of the other person. You can just kind of watch what they put out there. Something like Twitter, where you can just follow people that, over time, you follow more and more people that aren't like you, that come from a different place, that come from a different background, that have a different lived experience. And I think if you expand your social media bubble in that way, it can really help you to get an understanding. One thing that I also had to calibrate along the way was that I had to continue to understand that one person's experience is not every person's experience, that you just kind of have to keep seeing them all together. Where, if you follow various people on social media, you might see one person saying something. It's like, oh, I'm following this one person because they have these traits and they keep saying this, so that's how all people with those traits think. And it's like, no, that, none of these people are a monolith. You just kind of have to get the full experience from, all the different people that you follow, and try really to get yourself out of that bubble and try to get yourself living all these different experiences, because, in that way, social media can be good, where it doesn't require any kind of travel. It doesn't require any kind of face-to-face interaction, which, it was probably better for learning empathy, but it is a way that you can break out, because all too often, I think, especially on social media, we want to fall back to what we like, and what we like is people who are like us. That's what most people like to hear and like to see, is somebody like me. So it can be a little bit hard at first, especially if you're not ready for it, if you're not open-minded enough to start expanding that and start hearing things that you might be biased against, or you might not be expecting, and you might have reasons why it's wrong, which is another part of it, I think, is that we need to understand, as we are seeing these other people's experiences, we need to understand that it's true. That all too often we're like, oh, that's not true. They're just exaggerating that. How often did it go on in Hollywood where women would complain that they were being sexually harassed and assaulted, and people would be like, oh, she's just making that up. And then the whole Harvey Weinstein thing came out, and all these women were like, yes, it happened. And finally, people were like, yes, that happens. It wasn't just this one-off saying that it happened. So I think there's a large part of it too, to kind of, understand and listen to what these things are happening as well, and to understand what their experience is.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because having empathy doesn't mean, we grab picket signs and take action on everything we hear. Mm-hmm. It means trying to understand that someone else's experiences are theirs. So you and I can go through the same exact experience, and I can't tell you how to feel about it. You may feel completely different than I do. I go out and I think it's something silly as an analogy, but I really like sushi, and I have a couple of friends that hate it. So when I go out and eat it, I have an enjoyable experience. It's something I love. I love the flavors, the textures, the whole 9 yards. If I were to take one of my friends who I know hates it, he were to eat it, it would be a horrible experience for him. He'd feel sick. He wouldn't feel happy. It wouldn't be enjoyable. So I can't tell him, no, you don't know what you're talking about. This is the best thing on the planet. You're going to enjoy it. Just do it because you're going to love it. His experience is his, right? And I think that helps. So how do we apply this to social engineering? Like, let's bring this in. I mean, we've been chatting for a while. We haven't even got to the SE portion yet.
That's right. Yeah, and I think one of the areas that we can also tie together empathy with social engineering is one of is it a catchphrase or is it a belief that everybody within our company knows and everybody, I think, works to live, which is to leave people feeling better for having met you.
It's one of our core principles. That's how we label it, our core principles here at SECom.
Yeah, so I think that's really important to have that kind of understanding, to have that empathy, so that we're not making somebody's life worse either. Because all too often when people talk about social engineering, it has the negative connotation to it, which is the exact opposite, I think, of what we tried to do, where we tried to really let people know that we are educators, that we're not really out to hurt anybody. We're out to teach people how to defend against these types of things and to try to leave them feeling better for having gone through this experience. And that way they feel more secure and they understand where their vulnerabilities might actually be.
But let's go a couple arguments about this, because our title is Adversarial Simulator. Mm-hmm. So that's what we call ourselves, right? We're Adversarial Simulator. So a company hires us to simulate the adversary.
Right.
How can we possibly leave people feeling better when I'm supposed to simulate the adversary?
I think a lot of that is that we understand what the adversary can do and some of their methods and abilities, and we try to replicate those in a way that are not malicious. So for example, let's say we get hired by a bank and the bank says, can you get into our vault and can you steal the money? Well, and a malicious adversary would say, sure, I'm just going to drive a tank right into the building. I'm going to place a bomb in the building. That will work. We'll be able to blow it up. We wouldn't do one of those types of things because, well, it's destructive. It's not going to leave people feeling better, but we have the ability to get to the same endpoint without all of that, big boom driving the tank into it. So just think of how much more of an impression that is going to leave if we can do things where either people don't know that we're doing it, they don't notice that we're doing it, or it's a positive experience for them as we're doing it and still get to that same end goal.
Yeah, I think of something, a little more on the lines of, especially at this time of year, new year starting, people are, focusing on their security awareness education inside of companies. And even though this isn't recent, and most of us listening to this podcast may have heard this story, but there was a big company who, because of COVID a couple of years ago, told all their employees that there would be no bonuses at the end of the year. There just wasn't enough money for bonuses. It's depressing, but they tried to say, hey, everyone's got their jobs. So, let's focus on that. And this is a good thing. No one's getting laid off, but it's just not going to happen. Now the security awareness manager is about to send out his monthly fish for the end of the year. And he sends out a fish saying, hey, we found some money for bonuses and you can claim your check by clicking here. Now, I think about where does empathy play a role in this? So imagine at this company, you got a number of employees, maybe single parents, and they're stressed, like a lot of people are. They're living paycheck to paycheck. It's the end of year, so maybe they celebrate the holidays, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to give little Johnny their presents that they try to do every year, even if it's something small. And then the email comes out and says no bonuses. So now they're even more stressed. How am I going to do this? I don't want to go in more debt, and Christmas is coming around. I got to do something. And then they get that email that says they found bonus money. I mean, who do you think's not going to click? And then when they clicked, not only were they told, hey, you're dumb, you fell for it, but now you got to go to mandatory training, as a punishment for falling for it. I think of that and I go, wow, that person completely lacked empathy for its employee base, not thinking about Sally, who's, single parent trying to keep her kids fed and happy. And that money might have been a difference to a holiday or not, not thinking about someone who just went through a serious medical and has a condition, has medical bills, and that extra money might have helped them get out of some debt. Not thinking of the student who is trying to pay off their college debts, and that money might have helped. Not thinking about any of those people, and literally just thinking about, I need to get my clicks in so I look good for the end of the year report, and sending out a fish that you could have thought of a different pretext that would have been a lot more empathetic and wouldn't have left people feeling so dirty. Ryan was showing me another one around the same time where they made people click on this. They had people click on this fish that was all about approvals to work from home. And then when you clicked it, you were told you failed and you had to drive to go to a center to take mandatory training. So they used the work at home method for people who were like maybe not making enough money, couldn't afford the gas, and then made them drive to go get their training. And you think, wow, where is this is the part where I think empathy can play a huge role in social engineering. And I'm not saying, hey, don't fish people. And I'm not saying don't fish people with, with realistic things. We do that all the time. I mean, we try to get as realistic as we possibly can. But when you're dealing with someone's livelihood or their families, their children, their mates, their spouses, they're, getting fired or getting hired, those things are not areas that should be used in security awareness, because it's never going to leave someone open to education. And I think that's the key point for us, is that when you think about your pretext, when it's all over, will your target be willing to take education from you, or will they look at you as the actual adversary?
And I think that circles back to the beginning of your question with, why don't we do those same types of things? Because all too often the answer that we hear is, well, the bad guys are going to do it.
Right.
And we can say, yes, the bad guys will do it, but one, we're not the bad guys. And two, we can achieve the same educational effect without acting like the bad guys and actually harming people, like blowing up the bomb inside the bank. We can get to the same goals without making people feel really bad for these types of things. And I think all too often it seems as though for some reason in the industry, people are just going for the click. They're going for the win. They're going for the haha, I pwned you kind of thing, as opposed to really having that empathy, understanding who that they are interacting with, which is one of the things that make our company very different from so many other security companies, because so many other security companies are network computer-based penetration testing companies, where we are human-based. So that's a huge difference, where if I hack a Windows 95 computer, sure, I can taunt that computer all day long and say, I just owned you.
If you find one of them on a network, you should taunt it.
Oh, you do. You definitely still see those. But, you can taunt computers all day. They're not going to feel bad. We don't necessarily need to have empathy for a computer. And I think sometimes the same people that do those types of things, because there is so much emphasis put on getting the win, getting the hack, that as soon as they then slide over to doing some social engineering, they still have the same mindset. They still have that mindset of, I need to win. I need to get the hack. And I think that's where some of those, we're going to send out this pretext that is just going to get the click because I know this is going to work and the bad guys are going to do it. I think sometimes that's where that falls into place as well. Yeah.
I think about an account for a client that we had once, that we had a large base of people. And there was this one department. I can't remember the exact number, but let's just say it was like 50 or 60 people in this department. And every time we fished them, it was almost 100% click ratio in that department. And we tried our hardest to be like, what is going on? We don't have a baseline for these people. And one day I say to my POC there, I said, listen, I want to literally send a fish to that group of 50 or 60 that says, this is a fish. Please report it. Do not click here, just to see what happens.
Right.
And he's like, do it. I did it. 100% click rate. And I'm like, what? Like what? And at first I'm like, these people just don't care. They don't care about your business. This is unbelievable. Like these people just don't care about security. In my head, I'm saying all this. And then I'm sitting there and thinking, I need to know why. So I said to my point of contact, I'm like, is there any way that you can get a hold of the manager there and we can have a conversation with a few of the people there, just find out. So they did. They set up a meeting. So we get into this meeting and, I say, hey, last 6 months, we've been phishing you guys every month. And it seems like no matter what we send, and their guy's like, oh, you're that guy. It's like, well, let me tell you why. Let me tell you what happens. And he's like, this certain department was literally inundated with hundreds of email per person per day. So their inboxes, and they had a requirement that was to be able to look at and reply or respond or take a proper action to every email that was in their inbox every day. So we would phish them, and we used internal email addresses. So let's just say it was Social-Engineer. So it would be like HR at Social-Engineer, or, accounting at Social-Engineer, or, support at Social-Engineer, right? So that's the emails they were getting. So they said whenever they saw something from internal, they literally just clicked the link because they thought, well, this is what they want. They saw the page come up about training and they were like, crap, fell for it again, and moved on with their day. So I sat back and I started thinking, okay, like, we're not helping them. We're actually creating more stress because they're all clicking it. They're seeing that they fell for it. They know that that's going to get reported to their manager. But the answer wasn't not testing them. So I thought about it for a really long time. And I went back to my point of contact and I said, so this rule they have, which I know we can't change, is that their job is to go through these email boxes and basically figure out every email. Is there a way that we could build a filter that will take the known spam and garbage out that they don't have to reply to? And they were like, oh yeah, I guess we can. This is going back like 10 years or so, right? So we did. We built this filter. We helped them build this filter, and it reduced their inbox by like 50%. And the first week, these people were like, well, what happened? What happened? Like, what's going on? We told them, we built a filter for you. And then they're like, well, here's a couple more email things that always come in that are always garbage. And they would start reporting those to us, and we would add them to the filter. And it got down to the things that were in their box were only the things that they actually needed to. And then we started to see interaction with our emails. Like, instead of just clicking it, them replying, going, haha, not getting me this month, loser. Like, they were like taunting us and then reporting the email. And I think this is such an important point, because it was easy at first for me to look at that and go, these people just don't care. They don't care about you. They don't care about your network. They don't care about their jobs. They just are clicking on anything, and they're insecure. Get rid of them. If they had done that, they would have gotten a whole group of 50 or 60 new people that would have had the same exact job and done the same exact thing. But by actually analyzing what was it that was creating the failure, we were able to fix part of their processes that then created an environment to allow for education to take place, as opposed to just more and more stress. To me, that whole process has to be rooted in empathy. Otherwise, it's too easy to just look at people as commodity.
Absolutely. And I remember last month when we were joined by Shelby, and she was telling a story of one of her physical penetration tests, doing some impersonation. There was another story that came up about where empathy was needed, that there was a situation which was extremely bad when it comes to security. But empathy was necessary in that situation as well. Do you want to retell what Shelby was seeing on that test?
Yeah. This was a really hard one for us, because as the team broke into a building late at night, and they got up to the front where the security guard normally would be, the security guard was asleep on her desk. I mean, head down, YouTube video playing on an iPad, just dead asleep.
Which, if you don't have empathy, you're somebody without empathy would probably go up and take selfies with that security guard.
Yeah. And then put them in the report,
right.
Mock them, right? Print one out and put it next to her or something. She was so asleep that at one point they went and they took a ladder from the truck dock, carried it past her, trying to breach a ceiling. I mean, they were there for maybe an hour and a half. She slept through the whole thing. So now, they come back, we have all this data, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I don't want to report her because she's going to get fired. Like, who wouldn't fire her? But I'm like, I can't not report her. I have to report her because the company is paying us money to keep them secure. This is a security breach. It would be like finding a hacker in a network and saying, I don't want to report the hacker because, it's from a poor country. So you can't, right? It's not ethical. So, I called my point of contact at the company and I said, look, we're going to put something in the report. And, we found the security guard sleeping and they were like, what? And I'm like, yeah, we did. And we have name and we have the time and you can tell who it is and all of that. But I'm going to ask you a favor that before you just dismiss the security guard, could you find out, is their kid sick and are they up all day taking care of a sick child and then having to come to work at night? Are they going through a horrible divorce? Would a different shift help them? Or is it they really just don't care about their job and they're a security risk? Can you at least commit to finding that out before we just kind of kick them to the curb? And they said, yeah, we'll do that. And I never got the outcome, like what happened, but they did commit to me that they were going to go do that. So I felt good about that because it's such a hard one because, our job is to keep the company secure. And part of that is reporting things that we see that are bad. At the same time, I always hate the idea of someone getting fired for the work that we do. Now, on top of that, if someone really is a security risk to your organization, I am 100% behind the idea of they got to go because, you can't risk, in this company, you can't risk 60,000 other jobs because one person decides to not care about their job. So you have to make that hard choice. But I always say, can we make that hard choice less quickly? Like, can we first get details and facts and make sure that it is the best choice as opposed to just the choice that has to be made?
And I think that's great advice also for people in managerial roles, that it's really important to understand the person that you're dealing with and the person that you potentially need to discipline, because all too often that we are really inside of ourselves and thinking about ourselves when those situations come up. Like you, for example, in an 8-hour day, you might have 10, 12, 15 meetings. You're just super busy. You don't have time for anything else. But if somebody comes to you and says, employee X is just not pulling their weight, they're not really doing their job all that well. Well, you're stressed out because you have all these meetings all day. You have your own deadlines to make. And now somebody's throwing this at you with this employee that's not pulling their weight. So you already feel the stress. You already feel angry and you just want to lash out at this person and say, what the heck? Why aren't you doing your job? This is unacceptable. You do this again, you're going to be fired. Meanwhile, that person just was told this morning that their spouse wants a divorce or their kid has been in the hospital for the last month and they've been pushing through it. That might not be the best way to deal with that situation. It's really going to be important to understand, why is this person behaving the way that they are? What is this person's intent? Is the person making the mistake because they're not trained? Is this person making the mistake because they think this is the best thing that they should be doing in this situation? Or is it somebody who has made this mistake multiple times before, has been told not to do this and just doesn't care, or has some other malicious intent? I think it's very important from a managerial perspective, and pretty much in any kind of disciplinary situation. I think this happens a lot in parenting as well, where you don't necessarily understand why the behavior happened. You just want the behavior to change.
And if even at the end, well, I love that all that advice is at the end, let's say you still have to make the really hard choice.
Right.
And even they weren't malicious, right? But you have to. It's just there's too much risk. Can you still make that hard choice based on empathy? Can you still do it in a kind way that gives the person dignity? Can you part ways in a dignified manner as opposed to, listen, you're a loser and you're always going to be a loser, so you're gone, right? That lacks dignity and it lacks respect. So can we do it in a way that that still gives the person the dignity that they deserve as a fellow human, right? And of course, I'm not talking if someone's being malicious and they're stealing from your company and they're being a horrible person and they're hurting your employees. That's a different story. But if you go through all those questions, you determine, there is some valid reason, but it's just not good enough. Like, we have to still take this action. Still think about how you can do it based on empathy. It will make you better. It will make you feel better in your life, and it will also leave the other person, even though I know it's a hard choice and it's hard to say this, but in the long run, that person will look back on that scenario and say, well, at least I was dealt with respect.
Yes.
Right.
And to take it back to your security guard example, like what if that security guard had an alcohol problem and she was asleep because she was drunk? Well, that's a situation where you can't have somebody with an alcohol problem who's drinking at work, drunk at work, being a security guard.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you need to just walk in and say, get the hell out. You can be like, I want to help you. You can't continue in this position until you're better, but let's get you the help that you need.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good analogy. So, I mean, this is an interesting topic that I think we covered a lot of different areas, not just social engineering, which I think there's a lot for us to consider if you're in this field, but even from a leadership and management role, from a parenting role, from all sorts of different avenues. We were able to discuss this idea of empathy. To me, I think it's one of those things that we all of us, regardless of how long you've been working on it, we can all work on it more. Talking about myself personally, I know I can always work on it more. It's not an easy topic to always keep in mind. I don't think anyone's ever perfect at it. You kind of need these checks and balances. But if you practice it and you make it part of your daily practice, I could say it becomes easier to think that way. So even if you fail at it, like, at this moment I failed at it, but it's easier to go back later on and go, oh man, that response was really lacking empathy. And you could see it more clearly because it becomes part of your practice. So there's no time like the present to start. We're in the new year. If this is not something you're strong at, start practicing empathetic responses to people. Start practicing putting yourself in someone else's shoes, understanding their point of view and understanding that their reality is their reality. And see how that helps you in whatever role you have, whether it's a manager, parent, social engineer, spouse, whatever it is. What are we doing next month, Patrick? As our dumpster master.
Yes.
You're our dumpster master. What's our next month?
I think our topic next month is one that still requires empathy, where we're going to be talking a little bit about scams. So some of the types of scams that I think we'll be talking about include romance scams and potentially even the IRS scams that we see, and being able to help understand where the victims of those scams are coming from and maybe why that those scams actually work.
Yeah, this will be a really, really interesting one and a hard one, because I think both you and I personally know people who have fallen for these scams and how devastating it can be, both emotionally and financially. So this will be an interesting one for us to talk about. So until next month, folks, stay safe, stay secure, stay empathetic, and we'll see you next month.